So, what has been the impetus to this entire subject? This past February saw the third lowest free throw rate in NBA history. And so far, in March, it's been even lower. If you didn't know, free throws overall have been declining in rate. There's been a declining rate in free throws for some time now, but you probably saw a lot of buzz around the offensive explosion that took flame in the fall last year, where you saw Luka score 73, you saw Embiid score 70, Cat scored 62 in a very humiliating loss. Donovan Mitchell scores 60, 70 points every year at some random point, but you understand what I mean. There was a lot of buzz around, man, what's causing this? Is this good for the game? Is this not good for the game? That is the groundwork here. Potentially unprecedented cause and effect, like reaction from the league office as far as ton of media coverage discussing that question about, is this too much offense? Seeing the individual scoring performances burning ablaze, and come back essentially in the new calendar year, to pretty significantly lower free throw rates. Let's talk about the policy itself first. Effectively, officials are enforcing playoff defense. I think that's actually the simplest way to think about it. They're allowing more physicality. They are enabling defenders to provide more physicality, like actually stand a chance at holding their own. And I think you'll see this the most with offensively initiated contact, an immortal source of confusion and befuddlement on my end as far as how on earth are you supposed to stop an offensive player if you, the defender, cannot defend yourself from the offensive guy initiating all the contact? Like, what are you literally supposed to do if you're the defense? It's been a very, very jarring, very weird thing. And you hear comments about it from certain players. You see coaches like Mike Brown just literally bring out their MacBook in the post-game interview with video footage of that's a foul and that's not a foul. Monty Williams calling out the terrible officiating. The New York Knicks having that insane foul called on, I believe, Brunson on Houston, which cost them that game. There's definitely just been a lot of spotlighting around the officiating of the league this year. So they are essentially allowing a lot more physicality, and you are going to see a lot of star players freak out about it. And so what does that really signal, and what are my initial thoughts on that before I get to the interview and what else we've learned about it? One, it's true to the spirit of the game. Defenders deserve a chance to fairly defend. It's almost like a bill of rights. You have to allow them to not be subject to initiation of contact from the other opponent if they're on parallel paths. So if you're shuffling your feet sideways to stay in front or whatever, and the other guy's also trying to get around you, the offensive guy just can't bulldoze into you, and that's your fault. Makes sense in theory. Sometimes they call it, sometimes they don't. I think historically it's been a big function of how bad can you make it look, which is why you get flopping now, which is its own separate thing. I think is just really annoying and really sad, but ultimately that is a symptom of this system crumbling. Enabling defenses to stand a better chance and actually put up a fight, I think is, again, true to the spirit of the game. If you think back to the 90s when Jordan made basketball international and a big deal, what were their offensive ratings? It was a lot of defense. Granted, pace and threes count more than twos, but they didn't know that, and whatever. Doesn't change the fact that defenses really mattered, and that was a fundamental component of the game and the product. Two, it's overdue. Stop dishing out fines because you won't improve your product. How many fines do we have to deal with because you can't hold yourself accountable? I mean, you hear Ant Edwards say multiple times, yeah, I'll take the fine. We didn't get any calls tonight. Just get slapped with a fine. Rudy was bad too, making the hand gestures. On one hand, 22-year-old Anthony Edwards, I'm yeah, I'm not shocked. But then you literally have Mike Brown, Sacramento Kings coach, if you didn't know, bring out a laptop to show the reporters in a post-game interview, this is absurd. Monty Williams is freaking out. It's almost like a take your pick at a coach in the league. Like, they've probably had some scathing words for their officials at a certain point this season. That is ultimately what is raising my eyebrows a lot more. Players are going to be players, but when you get coaches going that far and that upset about it, either the communication of things is broken or you're not enforcing your own interpretation of the rules. 3, it's essential for the longevity of the product. Think about it this way. Isn't it the more the regular season resembles the playoffs, the better? How many times do you hear people say, playoffs are just different, defenses are different, officials let you get away with stuff, the real good players actually matter, they really step up, yada, yada, yada. Well, then what the are we wasting our time and energy for? Why would I even bother sitting through and granted, this is not unique to basketball or the NBA, right? We all know what happened in the MLB last year with every first seed losing in 3 games or something or getting swept. That really blows because they play far more games. And so that's what I mean about essential for the longevity of the product. I don't think it's good to just have really good regular season players. I'm looking at you, James Harden, Joel Embiid. I understand that the regular season is about finding your alchemy and your mixes of players and timing, and obviously you can make trades and things like that, but it's just so sad sometimes. And so make it competitive, make it harder for guys to just bait their way into calls. And I think that there are a lot of other potential implications that could be extremely positive as well, or at minimum interesting. That's the foundation right there. So fast forward to the legendary Zach Lowe, his infamous Low Post podcast. If you don't know him, I can't recommend him enough. One of my idols, frankly. The guy just sounds like he is overflowing with love for basketball in like a wonderfully disarming and genuine and authentic way, and I just highly recommend it. But he is an employee of ESPN's and, has been a reporter, journalist, guy, whatever, insider for, decades. He interviewed Joe Dumars, the head of basketball operations, and Monty McCutcheon, the senior vice president of referee training and development. These are two literally two of the highest level league office guys as far as officiating rules interpretations, like how are we going to do this? Also the 65 game rule, all of that kind of stuff. They are the ones that are running it. Incidentally, they rarely do interviews. A lot more thoughts on that, but I was frankly floored that he, 1, was able to do that just objectively speaking, but 2, that they were willing to do that. So 2 quick points on that. 1, it's a great gesture and sign as far as the league goes for these guys to even give him, I think it was like 45 minutes or something. 2, that's how big of a story this has been. Dropping free throws. You can imagine Luka about to bite somebody's face off, I mean, he already gets pretty close to that as is, but wow. Okay. So there's at least some admission of empathy and self-accountability here. Hey, we can actually prove that we're people. So that was interesting. So how I'm going to move forward really quickly is I'm just going to point out quotes from the 2 of them that really resonated with me, with some quick reactions and thoughts as I go along. And then I'll move into the analysis and then implications. Again, the context for the interview was around, hey, we're seeing the drop in free throw rates. What is going on with that? Did you ever roll with that? Right. What can you tell us? First thing they covered and talked about was, quote,
it's about creating better competition, not limiting scoring.
I agree with, certainly. Nobody cares about the actual score. People just care about how close the teams are, right? We need it to be competitive. We want it to be engaging and entertaining. Makes sense. 2,
there hasn't been a conscientious effort to shift towards less fouls. It's the culmination of a year-long worth of work to reach consistency.
You may ask yourself, if it is a year-long's worth of consistency, why did we see such an enormous explosion in the fall that was far outstripping and outweighing anything we saw last season? I don't know. Interesting. Next.
The game itself informs what our work looks like. Refs will always be a half step behind the innovations of the game.
Makes sense. If you didn't know this, at the turn of the century, the opposite had happened, where defenses were stifling offenses so much to the point where they had to introduce new rules. That was noted in the next quote, actually, from Joe, when Zach asked him straight-faced if the pendulum had swung too far for the offense, he said,
I think the pendulum may have swung too far, just like defense in the late 90s.
So this is an admission on the record, you're basically admitting, yeah, the pendulum has swung too far, but we're going to keep going. When asked about, okay, well, if the pendulum swing pretty far, then we're talking about reinterpreting the rules or evolving the rules, right? If you think back to the amendments in the Constitution and all these things or whatever, like, this is good. This is how things work and should work. Don't mind the fact that we have no say or any visibility even into how these things are working, really.
It's about getting the game to look the right way. You don't want the game to look the wrong way. That's the right balance. Taking away the non-basketball move while still allowing players the normal basketball motions.
This is in the context of the Zaza Pachulia, the landing zone under Kawhi Leonard, who destroyed his leg in the playoffs and ruined the Spurs' entire playoff run that year because Kawhi just destroyed his ankle on Pachulia's foot or whatever. Now it's a very serious call that is called quite often now. Was that long overdue? Hell yes, it was, but thank God they finally got it. When Zach went ahead and floated a couple different kind of defensive ideas, proposals, if you will, Joe wasn't having it. You can tell by this quote. He goes, quote,
"You hear a lot of stuff, man. And my question is always, what's it look like? What's it mean for the league? And has somebody else tried it?"
Zach proposed elongating the number of seconds you can be in the lane. If you notice, centers can only be there. They rarely already call like a 3-second lane violation, where basically Shaq was literally so dominant that they had to introduce a rule so that you couldn't just sit right under the basket. Like, you have to like get out of the lane every 3 seconds. So if you see any center on defense, they are constantly like skipping side to side or whatever and like getting out of the lane, getting back in, whatever. Just an example of what Zach had floated. It was pretty deflating and extremely clear from both the substance of Dumar's response and the tenor of the delivery that he had absolutely no interest in actually entertaining any meaningful or insightful discussion about potential ideas. In his defense, they have the competition committee, the conduit by which coaches and the Players Association and all that and GMs, I'm assuming, can formally discuss and submit and propose ideas. He had mentioned, I think the other one was like eliminating a corner three. He's like, yeah, I've heard of all those things, but these are just the standard list of questions that we got to figure out. Okay, well, one, this is all corporate fluff and pretty meaningless because these are the most obvious questions you can ever ask whenever any sort of proposal is ever asked. That is filibuster. In addition, there was never a jumping off point where he mentioned any sort of process or any sort of apparatus for either piloting new ideas or potentially integrating as an early adopter or something like that. Basically sounded like an extremely tall order for them to do anything from the ground up. So I don't think that this is groundbreaking news, but the league is extremely self-righteous, conceited, myopic, and hedonist as far as what has motivated change and what hasn't. The mere theatrics of pretending to entertain any sort of ideas was met with immediate filibuster and meaningless nonsense. There was no interest in piloting or becoming an early adopter of anything. If you're asking really basic questions that any corporate executive or a corporate leader would ask, as far as, has somebody else tried it? Oh, no? Well, then why the f would I be the first one to do it? Because I don't want to risk anything ever. So didn't like that. Next, so Zach asked them explicitly and specifically about the 65 game participation policy for in-season awards. I love this. So Joe Dumars goes,
"Yeah, Zach, I want to address this head on. This 65 game participation rule was collectively bargained with the Players Association, and after a lot of discussion..."
Now I'm paraphrasing, but after a lot of heated discussion, landed on 65 games. That is 80% of 82. 82 games is the length of the regular season. That is not changing. Players Association agreed to it. That's where we are. It's really funny. When you have shared liability, that was the very first thing that he said. It wasn't just us. But I'm not going to respond to explicit questions around other changes that I've made that is causing fewer free throws now, but rules that obviously everybody knows for sure are new and exist. I'm going to make sure I point out that it was not just us. Lastly, and the most depressingly, Zach asked them about the conflict of interest for players like Tyrese Halliburton, who could be up for tens of millions of dollars by making all NBA teams, but they have to reach the participation threshold. And if you didn't know this, Tyrese is playing horribly and has been for the last month and change now. Post a hamstring injury, clear as day. This guy is forcing himself to play after a hallmark first half of the season, I would say, where you might as well write and pen his name for one of the All-NBA teams, and deservedly so. But the guy's clearly not healthy, and he's doing it literally just to get, it's like $43 million, additional $1 million he could get from making an All-NBA team. And Zach mentioned that explicitly a few times. It was like, hey, like, okay, so you want to introduce this new rule. What about these guys? Like, how is that taken into consideration? I'm sure you expected this, right? And Dumars goes,
before the season, I was very adamant with the guys that this wasn't the league forcing you to play hurt. Don't do that. Don't do that.
So, in other words, how do we account for tens of millions of dollars being on the line for guys to force themselves to play through injury? Oh, I asked them not to do it. Before the season, I asked them not to do it. And I wanted them to hear that from me personally. Just don't play hurt. You know, if you can't play, you can't play. Also, you might lose out on $40 million. You just saw a bunch of different quotes in response to different components of what's kind of going on. The recent drop in free throw rates and motivators for that. Number one in my analysis is looking at the recent drop in free throws. Let's get something extremely, extremely clear. What's really happening is you are reinterpreting the rules to be more equitable towards defenses, not cracking down on enforcing the historic rules more consistently. Virtually the entire first half of this interview were them parroting the exact same lines. It was like the worst candidates for the Republican Party, where they clearly were just given like 3 bullet points that they need to hit on. We're not talking about more consistent enforcement of the same rules. We are talking about interpreting the rules differently in ways that reflect the modern game, on top of enforcing those reinterpretations consistently. So you understand the nuance I'm trying to say here. They clearly went into this interview with the perspective that we cannot acknowledge that we are evolving our interpretation of the rules. We need to frame it as, oh no, we're just enforcing it, finally. We're just finally enforcing the rules correctly and consistently. Okay, so multiple things with that. You said,
there hasn't been a conscientious effort to shift towards less fouls. It's the culmination of a years-long worth of work to reach consistency.
Why was there an unprecedented spike in offense in the fall then? I'm not a tenured basketball operations professional, but I would have to imagine the graph looks a little more linear. I'm not really sure why we had this enormous blip before 6 weeks ago. Don't use consistency as a crutch. Players, coaches only feel the game has become unfair because of your interpretation of the rules. You can't use the consistency as a crutch and claim that the rules have always been right. Let me put it a different way. You can equitably enforce policies even if the policies themselves are not equitable. True or false? If true, then how come teams and players aren't at fault for not improving their ability to draw fouls? Listen, if your goal is to have better competition, there are 2 levers you can pull. Tell the players and teams, get better at getting fouled. Or change the foul rules to not be so egregious and annoying. My point is, you can't pretend like you were right all along and now you're just finally following through. First of all, that just makes you look really dumb and incompetent. Sorry. But secondly, this is your own game. The only reason people are saying things are unfair are because of how you have historically interpreted your own rules. And listen, like I said before, with the Constitution and the amendment system and this doesn't have to be vilified. I just really want to make sure people are understanding here. There's a difference between enforcing rules equitably and reinterpreting rules to become more equitable in and of themselves. Both of those are duties of the league office. So if you can actually admit that you are in fact reinterpreting the rules, as well as trying to make it consistently enforced. What's the carrot and the stick for doing so now? So let's just backtrack really quickly and point some things out. Ready? Steph Curry enters the league, and the Golden State Warriors unlock pace and space and unbelievable shooting that the world had never seen before. What did that mean for the NBA? They sold a ton of tickets. Golden State Cavaliers, that was the peak of the NBA. The NBA has never gotten back to those level of views, ever. What did that mean for the officiating in the game? Well, they let offense reign supreme. Right? We need crazier shots, tougher shots, smaller dudes that are faster who can make tougher shots. Everything is about shots now. We need crazy highlights. We need more shooting. Offense, 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 always offense. And then what the hell do you know? All of a sudden, Steph is throwing his body every time he shoots the ball. Trae Young is throwing his body all over the court to beat the Knicks, and the mayor of New York City, de Blasio, literally flames him in an interview after he beats the Knicks.
You're not playing basketball.
Yeah, you're not. Whose fault is that? He's winning. What are we talking about? This is my point. It's not an enforcement of rules problem. It's an interpretation problem. What does this ultimately boil down to in business sense? Because money is the only thing that matters. Do not forget that. It's a worse product, and it's a harder one to sell. Respectfully, the Detroit Pistons and Charlotte Hornets of the world are scoring 130 points. It was like terrible. It was a terrible product. What happened? Oh man, you fast forward a few months and now we're in 2024 and oh, that's not a foul? Wait, where's my foul? That's not a foul anymore? That's crazy. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the Giannis's, the Shea's, the Dame Lillard's, and what, I mean, they're all going to get their calls anyway, most of the time. What is the conclusion? It was never about evolving the rules alongside of the game. It was about what was making a better product. Years long worth of work? Well, you really shit the bed in the fall. And why did it even take place a year ago? Why did it take a year? Did we invent new rules within the last year? I don't really think so. Have we? Other ideas I'm thinking of? Sports betting. Do not fool yourself at all. That is literally going to be the lifeblood of this entire industry. It already is. When Dame Lillard shoots free throw number 17 in game 2 of the postseason against Boston, I might fuck up some lines. Having guys kind of foul out or have to sit, and then all of a sudden you're managing minutes, which ultimately impacts production. If you're trying to bet on Rudy Gobert blocks and he's got 2 quick fouls in the first quarter, he's not coming back for a minute, so sorry about your bet, bud. Point number 2 that I'm also curious about, especially with the injury stuff, you're allowing more physicality, and I feel like player fatigue is going to be a real thing. There have been literal studies published about how load management does not necessarily improve or positively impact player performance. If you don't know the technical definition of load management, an analytical approach to identifying and mapping out exactly which games you could/should sit for, even if you were perfectly healthy. That was a thing because the postseason was just worshipped and ring culture. I will say though, I think that the fatigue and injury risk is really, really real, particularly with the pace and space era where, yeah, you're not mashing bodies together. You're just running and changing directions very, very rapidly. And everybody's wearing low top shoes, sneakers. I think for me, that would be the stick. Players having to work even harder to score. Just something to think about. So 1, make the product better, sell it better, introduce new entertainment, AKA hashtag make defense great again. It's been said. It cannot be unsaid. 2, sports betting. Stop having guys in foul trouble. This is stupid. Need to make rent. 3, the actual stick I'm thinking of is, well, opportunity costs of people being like, this league is super dumb. Why would I even watch a single game before April? Kind of feel that. Also, 2, is just player fatigue. But we'll see. Last section here around implications. Number 1, what is this going to mean for guys like Dame, Trae, Shea, Luka? Luka might strangle a ref on the court, and I'm curious what protocol is in place for that. He might get suspended in the first quarter of the first playoff game. It's unclear. It's basically just playoff defense or playoff officiating where you're just allowed more physicality because we need to make this really, really exciting. We will see. 2, is this going to help shift the weight towards the regular season more, you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're trying to think about how to enhance the quality of the product when it's just not even the same sport in the regular season versus playoffs. So maybe that is going to be a positive impact of it. 3, and really interesting to me, is around potentially a downstream effect of the, what I'm calling the talent equilibrium shift. Are we going to have more higher prospects for defensive reasons? Think about it. When's the last time we had a super high draft pick go out for defensive reasons? I mean, I'm not going to lie to you guys. Wembanyama is going to be the exception for everything. He's going to be this generation's Wilt. So I don't even classify that. But even before that, is like Paulo wasn't going to be that. Anthony Edwards sure as hell was not going to be that. And maybe Anthony Davis, maybe Joel. I don't know. I'm really curious if that has an impact on like what teams will look for. All right, last but not least, I know I've been very critical of Dumars and Monty in the league office. Hopefully you guys can tell it's coming from a good place. They're operating very recklessly and unsustainably, might I remind you. This little transparency and self-accountability is alarming, to say the least. Not to mention, as the league gets increasingly talented, increasingly competitive, more guys going to be in contention for all NBA teams. God forbid we have expansion teams. Like, I think how you make decisions, whether the considerations or any responsible or accountable figurehead or things like that, I just truly, truly believe it's going to be very important to have that figured out. But what I want to say is those two coming on Zach's podcast to do that interview is a great first step towards being more transparent. Like I said, I was absolutely floored that they even did that. Really good for the league, even if it's fluff, and then own up to mistakes. Of course, my brain goes to the Knicks Rockets game and how that ended. I left like an 800-word litany flaming the NBA communications Twitter after their appallingly useless report on their decision. It was about the judgment of the official, not the misapplication of the rules themselves. I fundamentally don't understand how you could have a misapplication of the rules themselves without it involving the judgment of the official. It was almost offensive how nondescript and useless it was literally like 100 words maybe. They don't want to be held accountable. They don't want to explain any of their decisions at all. And that's totally what their incentive is. Why the would they care? I mean, granted, we are the customers and ultimately everything comes back to that. But things like the final 2-minute report after some of these games where referees are supposed to write out in detail any missed calls that took place in the final 2 minutes, communally laughed at and mocked for being absolutely useless and almost entirely protective of the referees themselves, right? They're always looking out for themselves. They're never going to acknowledge or own up to any sort of mistakes. I think that could very much be improved. I threw out the idea in that response to that Knicks Rockets outcome is about the presence of governing bodies, like third parties, basically. There's nobody actually sort of overseeing that the NBA officials are managing themselves effectively. Like, it's just Adam Silver who wants to make money and then the officials who want to make Adam Silver money. So like who on earth would actually be incentivized to like make better decisions in the perspective of the actual consumers or customers here? Nobody. They don't care. They don't care. 2 is reducing the replays. I know that's been a hot topic because of that Warriors-Lakers game on Friday, which I completely understand. That needs to be shored up. I don't know. I love some of the ideas that have been floated out, though. Things like giving the replay people a shot clock or giving them a finite number of reviews or even making them only be able to use full speed review footage to decide on things. I'm sure there is some decision by committee type of process where you see all the people in Secaucus looking at 1 million screens. And if one of them has a problem, like it's going to take a really long, like screw it, dude. Like literally give them a shot clock. Like, well, not like 30 seconds, but give them like a 5-minute timer straight up. You have 5 minutes. Let's make this like NASA launching a rocket. Like, you got 5 minutes to make this happen or we all die. That's it. That's it. Somebody's in charge. We all know how the military works and how corporate America works. Somebody's somebody's boss. There's always a boss. You got 5 minutes. There you go. So hopefully that was insightful, guys. I really just wanted to do a deep dive on this because I care a lot about this stuff. It crosses into the domain of effectively running and managing businesses and how to embed and incorporate customer perspectives, employee perspectives into decisions pertaining to evolving and sustaining the good, successful elements and outcomes of what your business can do. So I care about it evolving the right way. Biggest punchlines are: 1, own up to your own stuff. Don't treat us like we're dumb. Don't fluff all this stuff with a bunch of corporate speak. Own up to what you're doing. Be clear about it. And be proud of it. Listen, if this goes as well as you have been told it will, you would have wished you had taken credit for it anyway. It's a good thing. This is how society evolves. The level of hesitancy here to even own up to any of it is pretty alarming. That, or make it something closer to the All-Star break where we get to vote on it or something like that, you know, like an actual shareholder thing. I have no idea. Okay. Well, that is it for today, guys. I really, really hope that was helpful, but this has just been on my mind quite a bit, and I, as always, would love to hear your thoughts and really appreciate the time. All right. Until next time.